Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. I am Heena Gambhir. India, for the second time, viewers, in almost 6 months, is in the middle of a power crisis. The reasons behind why the fuse is about to blow are same as earlier and different. In October, the stated reason burst in demand as the economy recovering from the pandemic. Today, it's recovery and setback to recovery in form of Russia-Ukraine conflict and host of old familiar issues. Viewers, 108 of these 173 power plants that run on coal, domestic and imported, today have below critical coal stock. 8 are shut. Power Minister R.K. Singh has stated there has been a 13.6% rise in demand for electricity. Prahlad Joshi, the Union Coal Minister, says coal production to meet demand is up by 15.4%. But when headlines say major coal shortage, huge power outages, then it raises many questions. Are they really presenting the complete picture? The answer is no, because the reasons cited for the crisis are mere symptoms. The problem is deeper and basic. And in simple terms, we have a crisis due to financial and management misgovernance. The stakeholder in the power cycle are state governments, generation companies, discoms, and consumers. So there are 4 key stakeholders that I'm talking about. A look at the tons of data available shows one alarming historical fact, that none of the stakeholders have perfected the art of paying for what they use. I'll explain to you why am I saying this. Generation companies today owe coal companies almost 12,000 crore rupees. Distribution companies owe 1.10 lakh crore to generation companies. And that's not all. The 5 states which today are talking about massive power crisis, including Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, these 5 states collectively owe 64,868 crores in discom dues. You heard me right. That is the kind of amount they have not yet paid. 44,829 crores in accumulated losses. 51,829 crore in subsidy due and 37,630 crore in government department dues. Now, these dues are there because of revenue crunch, no investment in power infrastructure, free bijli for good politics, but poor economics. And government departments are not paying for the power that they use. So, you all must be thinking that this power crisis is unprecedented because India does not have coal. No, that's only one part of the story, and I'll explain to you that as well. But that is another reason that I've just highlighted, the mismanagement, financial mismanagement. Now, as a result, there have been long spells of power outages in various parts of the country, and that are impacting each one of us. They say desperate times call for desperate measures, and we today are in a desperate situation. To address India's energy crisis, Centre has invoked Section 11 of the Electricity Act, mandating all imported coal-based plants to generate power at full capacity. Now, viewers, Section 11 of the Electricity Act means that the government, in extraordinary circumstances, may ask a generating company to operate and maintain any station in accordance with its directions. So clearly, this is an acknowledgement that what we are facing today in the country, the power crisis that is there in the country today, it is an extraordinary situation. Not just this, to ease pressure on domestic coal, states have been asked to import at least 10% of their coal for blending. While Punjab, Gujarat are in advanced stage of finalizing the tenders, Tamil Nadu and Maharashtra have already issued orders for importing coal. Not just this, a couple of days ago, Indian Railways cancelled passenger trains to ensure a seamless supply of coal to power plants. 1,100 passenger trains were cancelled for a month to prioritize coal delivery. Now here also, passenger trains have been cancelled. People who had to travel via these trains are suffering today because of another crisis that needs to be addressed immediately. So how big is this crisis? And, in a way, it can be gauged by India's daily thirst for power and coal. India is the third largest producer and second largest consumer of electricity. India is world's second largest producer, importer and consumer of coal after China. 70% of our power need comes from China. Yet, today, we are facing a shortage and we have to now rely on import of coal. So let's find out what's short-circuiting India's power story. That's our big focus on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening, because it is impacting each one of us. In this peak summer, we have to face power cuts. Anil Razdan, former Power Secretary, is joining us on the broadcast. Debashish Mishra, leader Energy Deloitte India, is live with us. Harry Dhaul, who is DG, Independent Power Producers Association of India, live with us. And we are also joined by Partha Bhattacharyya, former chairman and managing director, Coal India. Appreciate all of you, gentlemen. Thank you very much for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening. Mr. Anil Razdan, I want to begin the discussion with you. Why is this crisis this time so bad in your opinion? We know India is the third largest producer of electricity in the world, and today it's facing a major power crisis. What is your assessment?
I think you've rightly summed up the key issues that are involved. Unfortunately, as I've said in some earlier debates also, in this particular crisis that we are now facing, we've had 2 years of virtual slowdown of economic activity because of the COVID. We also have had a shortage of coal a few months earlier, regaining economic activity in a big way, and a peak summer starting quite early. I think all these factors have contributed to this particular crisis. But as the crisis was growing, there are certain basics that you have outlined, and that is that yes, power for many decades has been tried to be used as a political commodity. It is essentially an economic commodity. It is manufactured through all processes of any commercial activity or industry, and it must realize its price. The other issue is that there's a hard reality that we are very heavily dependent on coal, despite all the assertions that coal is a dirty fuel. We are, meeting almost 78% of our requirement from fossil fuels still. There's coal or gas to a much smaller extent. And we have, over a time, yes, we have to go for solar. We have luckily connected a transmission network across the country where you can transmit power across the four corners of the country, exchange powers, probably utilize the solar activity or the wind activity in different parts to be able to transmit. But all this mechanism requires a certain degree of funding and funds. And even today, the realization that, yes, we have to import coal, we have to blend it almost a decade and a half or 2 decades back. We had envisaged this thing that, yes, we need imported coal at coastal locations, and some of the ultra mega power projects were also devised on that. Now, any energy source comes at a price. And it is quite true that coal prices have shot through the roof. Transportation is very expensive. But in the whole game, the railways also, which have been transporting coal across, and it's a freeway game between the generating companies, Coal India, and the railways. We have the railways subsidizing their passenger transport through a lot of freight charges. So all this is adding to coal. Besides, it's a valued client for the railways. But we must realize that India is also essentially a developing country and not a rich country. I wouldn't say we are very poor any longer. But politics and poor economic management in the power sector has made our power distribution companies particularly poor or bankrupt in some cases. So politics has to be taken out. Energy must be recognized as a source of economic activity or a fulcrum. At the same time, as I have been saying, that because we are not a very rich country, we have to have demand-side management. We have to design our buildings in such a way that all the new building stock that we are building, that it is not a power guzzler for climate control. We have to design our taxation in such a way that the energy efficient equipment, whether it is climate control or other power driven equipment, that what is more energy efficient attracts a lesser excise duty and a degree of taxation, so that it is more affordable. So it's a supply side management, it's a demand side management at the same time, and also the consumer must pay. The regulators have come into place. They've got to see that the consumer gets the power, the generator gets his money, and ultimately, of course, the fuel people also get their money. We've got to move at the same time towards the newer fuels, the benign fuels, but build storage capacities, batteries, or whatever else you might say, because our hydro storage capability is limited owing to various factors. So all these factors combined, we've got to act prudently, we've got to act swiftly and introduce smart meters so that you pay as you use.
People need to pay as they use. I think that's the bottom line, because the stakeholders here, as I also mentioned earlier, are not paying. And then there has been extreme mismanagement. Interesting points you have raised, Mr. Razdan. Of course, we'll talk about the measures that the government has announced today in just a bit. But before that, let me also take the opening comments from my other guest, Partha Bhattacharyya. You understand Coal India. You've been former chairman and MD of Coal India. How important is the issue of non-payment to coal companies, the dues that are there?
See, coal supplies to power stations are done under a full supply agreement where there is a provision of payment as per cash and carry. You have to pay first and then get the coal. Now, it is enshrined in a contract. So if the payment is not forthcoming, then there is a breach of contract actually. So now the coal company is under some sort of a pressure, maybe relaxing the rules, or because of the crisis, they may be continuing supplies. But beyond a point, it's not possible to really continue that, because who takes care of the working capital requirements? I'm aware of cases which has happened in recent times. Profitable coal companies had to borrow from banks to pay salaries. Now, this is not a situation in which really supplies can continue forever. So I think what you have said is absolutely clear. The whole financial administration of the power sector needs to be revamped completely. And so everybody gets paid for whatever they're doing. And in any case, the Indian coal, domestic coal, is far, far cheaper than international coal. I mean, we sell coal at a discount of more than 50% to international coal. So even if that is not paid, then, then that is not the right thing to happen. So I think payment is very central to assured coal supplies under the full supply agreement.
Okay, but what you've said about how profitable coal companies have had to borrow from banks to pay salaries, I mean, that tells us how bad the situation really has been for coal companies as well. Harry Dhaul, what is your assessment of the situation as we are in right now? How bad is it? And why are we in this situation today, in your opinion?
Well, that's very interesting, because both the earlier speakers had talked about various issues, right from the coal side, and Mr. Razdan spoke about the issue on the DISCOM side. I would like to focus on what the government has done recently and start off with that. Number one is the Section 11 petition, Section 11 order that has been passed by the central government. Central government means the Power Ministry, which is for the first time in the history of the Act that this section has been used, to the best of my knowledge, by the central authorities. Now, once you issue this direction, all generating companies which were not generating power were and are instructed and ordered by law to start generating power. Now, the question then comes is who's going to pay for this power? I think that also has been tackled very nicely by this particular order, where the money that is to be paid is going to come from REC and PFC either to the generator or to the DISCOM. This is very important because money was the issue in the first place, and it is because of lack of money that coal was not coming. So if you are going to infuse some money into the generating companies, stroke the DISCOMs, you will get some relief from getting the coal supplies from the domestic sources. The second point is very important to understand is everyone wants a solution by tomorrow or day after tomorrow. It's not possible to do that for a simple reason that imported coal is going to take somewhere around 2 to 3 months to come to India. And by the time you'll be in the middle of the monsoons and you have the challenges of unloading large quantities of coal, etc., etc. So you are basically left with the option of diverting all coal to the power plants within the country which are already there. Second sub part of that is that those power plants which are not generating power or not generating full capacity should and have been ordered to do so immediately. The third part is they will get paid for this during this period, and the government has really done a fantastic job of stepping into this almost on an emergency basis. The fourth point is this is the only day till 31st October 2022. So that's the length and breadth of the Section 11 order that has been issued, and that has been issued for the first time. Now, the other issue that I think we should touch upon is why this crisis has taken place. I think this is a very old problem. It has been piling up ever since, in fact, even before the 2003 Act was enacted. You had in the early days of this century, 2002, 2003, payments were not being made to NTPC, who was the largest generator at that time. And a special fatwa had been issued that NTPC payments and power grid payments cannot be stopped. Otherwise, the state subventions will be intervened, and an agreement was signed between RBI, NTPC, and the state concerned. So the DISCOM, which was being run by that state, had to make these payments, and therefore you had fantastic results for NTPCs of the world. However, NTPC has not met its quota of 48,000 megawatts of MOUs that it had signed. Number two, getting coal and diverting it will solve the problem maybe in 10 days, 15 days, and this crisis will get over, and hopefully it will much before the monsoon steps in. However, there are some other fundamental issues which Mr. Parthasarathy talked about. For example, the coal mines fill up with water in the middle of the rainy season and you don't get enough quantity of coal. You also don't get dry coal in the monsoon because of the fact of the rainfall. So you are going to have this problem cascading, not exactly in price terms, but also in terms of the problem to be sorted out perhaps into next year. So you need to actually ramp up immediately all the investments and complete the projects for thermal generation, although it's not fashionable. But at the same time, that needs to be done because we depend 70% on thermal power capacity. I would stop at that for the moment.
Important points you have raised, and you are right when you say that it's not a new problem. It's an old problem. Debashish Mishra, how will you like to respond to the measures that have been announced by the centre now, and that also tells us that finally the government is acknowledging that it is indeed a crisis? Would you like to call them desperate measures, or do you think this is the right thing to do given the current circumstances?
This is the right thing to do given the current circumstances, and the current circumstance is a combination of factors. I mean, unusual, some 120 years all-time high heat wave conditions in North India. You have a situation where, last week we had a system peak of 207 gigawatt. I mean, that's the all-time high system peak that was achieved. And on supply side, you have, and the economy is obviously coming back from COVID kind of slowdown. And we, even before COVID FY20, we had a flattish year as far as the demand is concerned. And suddenly in FY22, we have a 8.5% increase in power demand. And we are experiencing a very, very high, as the Honorable Power Minister said, almost 14% increase in power demand. And on supply side, we have a geopolitical situation where because of the Ukraine war, the international coal prices have gone up 3 times. And on the supply side, there is, sudden, because the demand has gone up suddenly, there is coal at the coal mine, but there is no almost, negligible amount of coal, 22 million ton coal at the power plants. So almost 60 million ton coal is lying at the mines. And that is why government has invoked all the measures and all emergencies, like, diverting passenger trains and all those things to overcome this immediate problem of demand and supply kind of a situation. But the overall long-term issue is more, endemic, and it is there because the subject is a concurrent subject in our constitution. So as far as the DISCOMs are concerned, what you are mentioning, and the GENCOs and transmission companies within a state, the state has the authority to do whatever they want to do with it. And like you mentioned in your opening remark, and some of the other experts have also mentioned, it's become a very, political subject, and freebies are given during the election, and its results are more long-term. And we have seen in last 25 years, again and again, DISCOMs accumulated losses keep happening, and, because of you're not recovering monies from consumer by providing free power, inefficiency and whatnot. And when the accumulated losses and the dues become too much, then central government comes out with a scheme to restructure these things. And these things keep happening every, 5-7 years. And it continues. So probably the systemic changes are going to take longer term, solutions, and a lot of political will and consensus is needed to do that. A short-term problem, as you are seeing, that demand will abate in a few weeks, because I think there will be pre-monsoon showers and supply side situation will improve because government has taken so many measures. So overall, I would say that this is a problem which needs to be addressed on a longer term basis.
Okay, interesting point there. Mr. Anil Razdar, of late, what we have started seeing is that whenever there is some sort of a problem, either there is, this knee-jerk reaction that we see coming from the government side to help solve the problem immediately, or we are told to wait, automatically things will fall in place. For example, we all know what happened, during the fuel price hike, season. We saw fuel price rising. We were, waiting for government to do something, either the state government or central government, but nobody did anything. And now, because the international crude oil prices have, come down slightly, so oil marketing companies here have not really changed the prices, and hence, things are where they were. So at least for the moment, it's like a temporary relief. In power also, why does it feel that, monsoon season is going to begin, the demand will come down, hopefully things will be better on its own? Is that the mindset with which governments, both at the central level and at the state level today, are behaving? That's the reason why there is no sense of urgency to solve the problem completely.
I would seek your indulgence in just addressing one or two more basic issues. And that is, you see, the power sector needs, first of all, base load power. We've been using coal as a base load power. Countries as big as ours, particularly China, they're investing very heavily on nuclear power as a base load power. If you ultimately have to come down with emissions or handle global warming, but for that, you need a long-term plan. You need to start building up today and reach there tomorrow. We've been very, very slow in the takeoff on base load power, and that worries me. This business of coal, yes, it is very important today, but we have to see how do we solve it. Number two, getting imported coal across to all power plants for blending, I have my doubts how in the railway system you will be able to send that coal across for blending to the various power plants. It will create its own problems, its own energy intensity. So I think power plants which are nearer coastal locations, which are closer, they have to be tackled and compulsorily have to generate at full power, and that power can be transmitted, I think, in a much more energy efficient way and an economically efficient way to different parts of the country. You are right that yes, we have been doing this sometimes knee-jerk reactions, waiting for the weather. Yes, weather does play a part. International conflicts do play a part, as they played in the oil crisis or the oil prices. To say not even a crisis, I would say essentially prices. We have to understand that we have been operating on very, very marginal margins, so to say, for our energy comfort. And when there is a crisis like this, we pray for a better load reduction. So coming back to the point of load management, why can't institutionally, as I mentioned, it is not fashionable to say so, but why can't we concentrate also on demand side management, seek the cheapest solutions? Unfortunately, power is a concurrent subject, and the states have not been behaving as responsibly as they ought to. When there was a time when we could have built up a lot of hydro capacity, we did not do so. We have to, I think, look very closely at the hydro potential in Nepal. We've been tapping the one in Bhutan. But I think a much greater hydro potential is there waiting in Nepal, and we've connected the transmission systems, more or less the gateways to our consumption centers for more than a decade now. We have to look at these aspects, look in the long term, and not do crisis management. When we do crisis management at the last moment, we only say, oh, let us look up at God, that He's going to make the weather milder, and not look upon that thing as a sustainable economic activity, and today as a sustainable environmental activity. That is why I'm harping on the thing of non-fossil base load, demand side management, moving towards solar and wind, but building our own employment potential. What is the research and development expenditure that the highest companies, including Coal India, have done on further diversification of this? Coal India, Mr. Partha is a very good friend. He's been there. I've been involved with them also for a while. Have we diversified into other profitable, or are we just looking at the 200-year-old system of mining and just sending coal across? We have to look at coal to liquid. Got to look at coal to gas. What percentage of our expenditure we've been doing? Japan, Israel, Korea, Germany. These are countries which have done a huge part of RD&D, not only government, but also private. And that's the way forward.
Mr. Partha Bhattacharyya, would you like to respond? And we also want you to respond to the measures that have now been announced by the government. Do you think they are going to help? Also, state governments, we know, have a habit of not stocking on coal, and they always stay unprepared. Any piece of advice that you would like to give?
See, as far as the coal stocking is concerned, there are clear norms prescribed by the CEA, Central Electricity Authority, and they want the power stations to build up stocks. And normally that has not been happening. What happens is the power stations normally do the inventory management based on the pitted stocks that Coal India has. So if the coal is there in the pitheads, they feel comfortable. But that's not the way. Today we have coal at the pitheads, 50 to 60 million tons, but not at the power stations. That's because sufficient amount of effort has not been made and sufficient amount of payments have not been made for building up inventory of coal in the power plants. So that has to happen. I mean, CE has prescribed norms. So coal must be accepted, must be taken to build up that stock, then it should be paid for. That part is one. I think I will restrict my observations on one thing. You see, the total coal requirement in the country, that has to be met. And unfortunately, the problem has been lingering for too long because we have not created enough production capacity in the country. The country uses about 1 billion tons of coal every year and produces about 750 to 780 million tons, something like that. So there is a gap of 200 odd million tons, which is met by imports. Now that has happened only because the right amount of effort at the right point of time was not taken to create more productive capacity of coal. Coal India is the only player. Now that has changed after a very long time. It should have changed 15 years back, but from 2020, some commercial mining activity has started. So as and when the commercial miners start producing, and I understand that something like 40 odd mines are very close to starting operations because they have got the mine opening permissions. But mine opening permission doesn't mean that coal will start coming in very shortly. They have to, there are certain processes, overburden has to be removed, and then they will reach the coal seam. So coal may be about 1.5 to 2 years away from those mines. The other thing that the government has done right, I feel, is the captive miners. Captive miners have not been producing to potential for a very long time, but now they have been given a SOP that they should produce 50% more than what the induced plants require, and that can be sold in the commercial market. So that has had some impact. In fact, in FY22, the commercial these captive miners have produced 89 million tons, which is quite a jump from the 62 million tons they produced last year. And this year they're aiming at 120 million tons. So that is unshackled. The captive mining segment seems to have been unshackled. That is one. Government has taken certain other steps, like Coal Indian government. In fact, maybe today they had a road show in Mumbai. They are trying to sort of give away the discontinued mines, the mines which were abandoned in the past, but which has reserves, which were abandoned for technical reasons. Some good companies can come in and they can start mining there. So that should also start contributing. And these are mostly underground mines. Underground mining in India has not really prospered, but many places in the world, like Australia, China, is substantially underground. South Africa, US, we have very good underground mines. So I think that expertise, if that can be brought, I think at least they're starting with 20 odd mines. If those 20 mines can come into operation, that could be a low-hanging fruit, and they may be able to produce give some certain amount of coal. So with these measures, I think with other players coming in, it should be possible to ramp up the coal production to a point where coal availability will not be a problem. But then we have to also tackle the logistics part. Railways, I understand that they are ordered for large number of railway wagons. So I don't know when they will come. But once they come, that problem also should be to some extent sorted out. So I think actions are being taken. I mean, it's not that government is not acting. Government, definitely actions are being taken. And hopefully this will not be a very long duration crisis. It'll go on for some time, but not for too long. And suddenly the imported coal segment, that has taken hit because of the prices. People are not importing coal. And now the government is forcing a certain amount of imports. But that is also going to raise the cost of power. So ideally what should happen is the domestic coal should actually come up, and import of thermal coal should not happen at all. So that is the ideal thing to happen. In that case, people will get power at an affordable price.
And we know that effort was in fact made to enhance coal, but then we had a huge coal allocation scam that delayed the entire process as well. Harry Dhaul, but the problem that we have in front of us is of power cuts in peak summer. For how long the people will have to bear with this? Because the measures that have been announced today, the measures that you all are talking about, of course, the long-term measures that we have discussed so far will take time. So what should the people be now prepared for? For how long do you think this crisis is going to continue?
That's a tough one because there are too many factors and ifs and buts, including weather and availability of coal and the transportation of coal, as Mr. Bhattacharya very eloquently explained, the availability of rail wagons, increasing of generation capacity, the fact that the generating stations which are not generating because they don't have money, if money can be pumped in, something can be done immediately, maybe in 10, 15, 20 days. There's also, I've made this point repeatedly, lot of power projects have got stuck because of the fact that the discoms are not paying them. Government-owned discoms don't pay them, which is an old problem, and the government-owned banks are now taking them into insolvency. And I'm sure there's some financial solution that can be found where if anybody is owed money by a government-owned discom, it can be set off against the payments that have to be made to the banks. And I'm sure there are some financial experts in the government who can come up with ideas such as garnishee orders and whatever, so that the banks and others can get comfortable that the money that is owed to the generator will get paid from one government agency to the other. Therefore, in that wiping out that old outstanding that is there. And then also what can happen is that will release a lot of capacity which is stranded right now, is stuck in NCLT or stuck in insolvency proceedings for no rhyme or reason, just because the discoms have not paid them. I think this kind of thinking needs to be also brought in, that power sector assets are national assets. It doesn't matter the electricity is coming from a private source or a public source or a PSU. Electricity is electricity. There's no color to it. So I think the time has come for the policymakers to make their mind that, listen, these are national assets and they should not be wasted. What bleeds my heart is thousands of megawatts of capacity which has been installed uh, 5 years, 7 years, 10 years ago through competitive bidding have been almost destroyed by way of bad implementation of policy, and resulting in a situation where these guys have to sell their projects as scrap. I mean, can you imagine installing thousands of megawatts of capacity and it's going into scrap because A, there's no fuel, B, there's no PPA, C, there's no money being paid, and now you're going into insolvency. I mean, the insolvency is not a solution for the power sector. The last point I want to make here, through your listening to your viewers, is we at IPPAI had fought a case against the RBI's directives, which actually mandated taking these power companies to insolvency for one-day default. The Honorable Supreme Court upheld our contention. But then what did the RBI do? The RBI said, okay, let the banks decide. And the bank guy told me privately, how can we decide to lend money or restructure a private power producer in a stressed sector? Fingers will be raised against us 2-4 years down the line. So we won't take a decision. So this is the kind of stupid thing which is happening, which is unnecessary. And I'm sure this government being so proactive is going to, it has a hands-on approach, and I'm sure they'll sort it out. So hopefully it gets sorted out very quickly.
Okay, but non-payment is one issue that definitely needs to be solved. Debashish Mishra, do you believe we need politically incorrect deterrents for non-payment at all possible levels to stop this from happening in future, so that next year again we're not discussing the power crisis?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, the situation has come. See, there are 4 broad categories of consumer. You have industrial consumers who pay around 7-8 rupees in most of the states, commercial consumers who pay 10-12 rupees, residential, and you have agriculture. Now, most of the states have made agriculture free. And now the new wave is starting where political parties are declaring free power for even residential customer. Now the situation has come where the commercial and industrial consumers will not be able to pay more than what they are already paying, because there is huge amount of cross subsidy involved. So unless every segment of consumer starts paying, or the state governments which are declaring these subsidies pay the subsidy in time to the distribution company, obviously the financial stress will keep circulating throughout the system. There will be default. So what do they do? I mean, they will default because they are not getting payment, and there is a financial gap in the system, what the revenue they are receiving and what the cost they are incurring. Obviously, they are managing the whole working capital situation by defaulting in the supply chain. And that's not a sustainable situation, where consumers will probably soon realize that all these freebies, it comes with a high cost. And end of the day, in the peak summer, when the temperature is hitting 45 degrees, when you do not have power, you realize that, this is not worth it. You might as well pay some basic amount. And The thing is now at $2,200, $2,300 per capita income, most of the country, throughout the country, today we have capacity to deliver. It was not the situation where we were growing up. The country didn't have capacity, both generating capacity,
Yes.
transmission capacity was not there. Today we have ample system capacity. It's just that, the commercial side needs to be fixed. And as I mentioned in my opening remark also, because it's a concurrent subject, it needs state to come on board. And there are progressive states which have overcome this whole matter and, efficient discom, and the system will run properly.
Okay, Mr. Anil Razlan, I want to give you the last word on the issue of freebie or free Bijli. Do you see what the announcement was from Delhi Chief Minister Arvind Kejriwal yesterday that, from 1st of October in Delhi at least, free power will be given to somebody who will demand free electricity. First sign of rethink there coming, and others might also follow?
I think the ideal and the desirable thing is that you have been using the word that you pay as you consume. So just as in the telecom sector, you have a system of making payments simultaneously. There are people with smaller pockets, there are people with larger pockets. There is not necessarily the same system for them. Now, if the government wishes to compensate, let us compensate the person after he has made the payment and not insist that, no, you don't pay, we'll pay later. That never happens. These transactions have to be paid for immediately. And that's what I say, you emphasize on energy efficiency. Let us, for example, the LED revolution, that has solved a lot of lighting problems. Similarly, in fans, other gadgetry, we have to move in that direction. We are not doing as fast as we ought to. But politically, yes. Why blame only Delhi? I think every political party has been using this. Even in the last elections in UP, I read some very prominent parties saying we'll give free power. Why? You can't. Yes, give it. But pay for it first, then reimburse it. Maybe, if you do it on a weekly basis, on a fortnightly basis, by all means do it. But please pay as you consume. And I would just like to conclude that electricity is so vital to us that there is no power which is as expensive as no power at all. And I didn't say it, it's Homi Bhabha who said it decades back. And we've all realized how crucial it is. Thank God this was not happening when COVID was raging in the country. Otherwise, there would have been panic in some of the hospitals.
Absolutely.
Let's act in time.
There is nothing like a free lunch, free Bijli Mein Delight today. But that results in power cuts tomorrow. Freebies, we all know, come at a huge cost. Thank you very much, all of you gentlemen, for joining us here on Urban Debate on Mirror Now this evening.